Welcome to the Book Review Podcast. Today we're diving headfirst into a text that has, quietly shaped leaders and thinkers for centuries. It's influenced not just battlefields, but boardrooms, negotiations, even how we approach daily challenges. We're talking about timeless strategy, wisdom that really transcends its original context. Our compass for this journey, it's The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the oldest military treatise in the world, specifically the Lionel Giles 1910 translation. And you might be thinking, a military book, not for me. But trust me, this deep dive is going to uncover some surprising, universally applicable insights.
Oh, absolutely. What's truly fascinating here is how these ancient principles aren't just historically interesting, they remain incredibly relevant today. Our mission really is to extract the most potent nuggets of knowledge from this foundational text, to understand not just what Sun Tzu said, but why it still matters so profoundly to you, the modern learner, facing your own strategic challenges.
Right. So where does Sun Tzu even begin? Chapter 1, Laying Plans. He jumps right in, declaring the art of war is of vital importance to the state. He calls it a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. I mean, he really sets a serious tone, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. He's making it crystal clear from the outset that strategy isn't just about, tactics or fighting. It's about existential survival. And then he lays out what he calls the 5 constant factors, these fundamental conditions for figuring out success in, anything. The first one, and arguably the most profound, is the moral law.
The moral law? What exactly does he mean by that? It sounds kind of philosophical.
It is, but it's practical too. It isn't just about simple morale or team spirit.
Yeah.
For Sun Tzu, it's this deep alignment, a profound conviction. He says it's where people are so united with their leader and the cause that they would follow, regardless of their lives, undismayed by any danger.
Wow. Regardless of their lives.
Yeah. Think about that in a modern context. It's not just having a mission statement on the wall. It's about an internal compass that aligns every single individual's values with the organization's goals. That creates this unshakable resilience even when things get tough.
That's a powerful distinction, not just morale, but deep intrinsic alignment. Okay, what are some of the other factors he brings up?
Well, beyond that human element, he points to heaven, which sounds mystical, but it's basically the natural elements, night and day, cold and heat, times and seasons.
Wow.
The environmental factors you can't really control, but absolutely must adapt to.
Okay, heaven, got it, like timing and conditions.
Exactly. Then there's Earth. This is the physical landscape.
Yeah.
Distances, dangers, open ground, narrow passes, your operational environment, basically.
Right, the actual terrain you're dealing with.
Then the commander. This is about leadership qualities, wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and importantly, strictness.
The leader themselves, makes sense.
And finally, method and discipline. This covers the organizational nuts and bolts, marshaling forces, rank structure, supply lines, controlling expenditure, the practical stuff. Sun Tzu says if a general truly understands these 5, they're already well on their way to victory.
Okay, so these 5 factors: the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline. What does this initial strategic roadmap mean for us today? If you're not a general, how do you apply this wisdom?
It's really about a holistic assessment. Before you jump into anything big, a new project, a negotiation, even a career move, you need to understand these areas. Your internal unity, is your team really bought in? What's your own conviction level? That's the moral law. Then the external environment, market conditions, timing, that's heaven. The specific terrain, competitive landscape, the actual problem, that's earth. Plus your own leadership qualities and your operational efficiency method and discipline. If you neglect any one of these, Sun Tzu would say you're already at a disadvantage.
That makes perfect sense. Assess everything before you leap. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit counterintuitive for some. Sun Tzu drops this bombshell in chapter 1. All warfare is based on deception. Okay, what's going on here? How does this ancient military tactic translate today?
Right. It's a core paradox of Sun Tzu. The best way to win is often by not fighting directly. And deception is the absolute key to achieving that. Now, he isn't necessarily talking about outright lying in the way we might think. It's more about managing perceptions and expectations masterfully.
Managing perceptions, okay.
Yeah, like appearing strong when you might feel weak, or maybe appearing weak when you're actually incredibly strong. Appearing active when you're just preparing, or inactive when you're actually making a big move. The whole goal is to manipulate your opponent's assumptions. Right? Make them react in predictable ways that ultimately benefit you.
So like a strategic head fake.
Exactly. Think about a product launch that seems super quiet, almost invisible, then suddenly it just sweeps the market. Or maybe a negotiator who pretends they're not that interested to gain leverage. That's deception in Sun Tzu's sense.
Okay, so it's misdirection, like a magician's trick, not necessarily telling falsehoods. And this leads us straight into chapter 3, Attack by Stratagem, where he says, supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Why? What does that even look like? And why is fighting directly seen as the worst policy?
Well, the ideal isn't the glorious bloody battle. It's the quiet, bloodless victory achieved through strategy. Sun Tzu actually outlines a hierarchy, the highest form of generalship. Balk the enemy's plans entirely. Stop them before they even get started.
Prevent the problem.
Precisely. Next best is preventing the junction of their forces, stop them from teaming up or consolidating. Then, okay, if you must, attack their army in the field. And the absolute worst option, besieging walled cities.
Why is that so bad?
He paints a grim picture. Months of preparation, massive resource strain, and often, he says, you lose 1/3 of your own forces for a town that might not even fall. Yeah. It's a powerful metaphor for any direct frontal assault on a well-defended position in life or business. Incredibly costly, super high risk, and often just unnecessary if you're smarter about it.
That's a huge takeaway. Avoid that direct, costly confrontation whenever possible. It really brings to mind his most famous maxim, probably, from chapter 3. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But he contrasts this so sharply with knowing only yourself, or knowing neither. How do we apply this profound need for self-awareness and external intelligence, say when we're preparing for a major project or a really tricky negotiation?
That's the absolute bedrock, the ultimate strategic foundation. As Sun Tzu says later in chapter 4, a good fighter first puts themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, makes themselves invulnerable, essentially, and only then do they wait for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. It's not about rushing into battle. It's about building an unassailable position before you even think about engaging.
Build your defenses first.
Exactly. For a project, this means meticulously understanding your team's real capabilities, your resources, your weak spots, your true objectives. What are you really trying to achieve? For a negotiation, it's knowing your absolute walkaway point, your key strengths, but also your counterparts' likely motivations, their weaknesses, their priorities, what do they need. Only when you've done that deep internal and external homework are you truly ready. And often the battle, as you say, is pretty much won before it even begins, because you've already created this overwhelming advantage through knowledge.
Fascinating. So planning, deception, self-knowledge. Once you've laid those foundations, how do you actually execute, especially on a larger scale? Sun Tzu then gets into managing forces and leveraging strengths in chapters 5 and 6, talking about energy and weak points and strong.
Right. And he makes this really interesting point. Controlling a large force is fundamentally the same as controlling a small one. It just comes down to effective organization, clear signals, and leveraging momentum or energy. He details 2 main methods of attack: the direct, the obvious approach, and the indirect, the surprise, the flanking maneuver, the unexpected angle.
Direct and indirect.
Yeah, and what's truly insightful is how their combination creates, as he puts it, an endless series of maneuvers. Like a circle, he says, where you never come to an end. It speaks to this need for infinite adaptability and creativity in your strategy. And just to deepen that deception principle, he gives us this gem. Simulated disorder postulates perfect discipline. Simulated fear postulates courage. Simulated weakness postulates strength.
Wow, okay. Simulated disorder postulates perfect discipline. I love that. Seems so paradoxical, doesn't it? How hard is it for a leader to actually maintain that perfect discipline while projecting chaos? Can you think of a modern example?
Oh, it demands incredible mastery and absolute trust within your team or organization. It's not easy at all. Think of maybe a tech startup that appears to be just quietly tinkering in some small niche market. They look maybe a bit weak, maybe unfocused.
Where you don't pay them much attention.
Exactly. But in reality, they're laser focused, building something totally groundbreaking, some disruptive technology that's going to completely blindside the big established players. Or maybe a company that publicly makes a big deal about struggling with some minor issue, right? It diverts competitor attention, maybe makes them complacent. Meanwhile, secretly, they're gearing up to launch a major new product line that changes the game. The key is, it's not about being truly chaotic. It's about appearing so, strategically. That allows you to move unseen and strike where you're least expected.
Got it. It's a controlled illusion. He also really stresses the critical importance of speed, surprise, and imposing your will. He famously says, "Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second will arrive exhausted." And the key seems to always be attacking undefended points while making sure your own defense is solid by holding positions that just cannot be attacked.
Yes. And this connects directly to what he calls the divine art of subtlety and secrecy. Through this mastery, you become, in his words, invisible and inaudible. That's how you hold your opponent's fate in your hands. The ultimate goal is always to concentrate your forces where it matters most, while compelling the enemy to divide theirs to spread them thin.
Can you give an example of that? Concentrating force while dividing the enemy.
Sure. Imagine a new competitor entering a really crowded, saturated market. Instead of trying to fight the big guys head-on everywhere, which would be suicidal, they identify a small, specific, maybe underserved customer segment. An undefended point, right? They pour all their resources, all their energy into absolutely dominating that niche. They create such a unique value proposition for that group that the established players can't easily counter it without diluting their own main efforts, essentially dividing their forces.
Okay, find the gap and own it completely. Makes sense. Now, let's shift focus a bit from the grand strategy to the leader themselves, the general's own character, and how they understand the environment, the terrain. Sun Tzu outlines 5 dangerous faults for a general. What are these pitfalls, and what can they teach us about leadership today?
Oh, these are absolutely critical warnings, and they feel incredibly modern. He talks about recklessness, which leads to destruction, cowardice, leading to capture, a hasty temper, easily provoked by insults, a delicacy of honor, being overly sensitive to shame, and over-solicitude for his men, which actually leads to worry and trouble because you can't make tough calls.
Recklessness, cowardice, temper, touchiness, and being too nice, basically.
Yeah, you could put it that way. These aren't just ancient flaws, they're timeless leadership traps we see all the time. Recklessness leads to poorly thought out initiatives, doomed projects. Cowardice means missed opportunities, failing to act. A quick temper. That just alienates your team. An overly sensitive ego makes you react irrationally to criticism or setbacks. And that over-solicitude, the inability to delegate or make hard decisions because you want everyone to like you, that can paralyze an entire organization.
Wow, it really is about self-mastery as much as anything else, isn't it?
Fundamentally. Beyond personal character, Sun Tzu spends a lot of time on terrain. He categorizes it into all these distinct types: accessible ground, entangling ground, narrow passes, precipitous heights, ground far from the enemy.
Right, there are like 9 varieties of ground in another chapter too.
Exactly. Chapter 11 lists 9, like dispersive, facile, contentious, open, serious, difficult, hemmed in, desperate. We don't need to list them all, but what's the core insight here?
Yeah, what's the big takeaway about terrain?
The core insight is simply this. There is no universal playbook. One size does not fit all in strategy. Each terrain, whether that's a literal landscape, a market situation, a team dynamic, or a personal challenge, demands a completely different strategic response. You have to adapt. What works on open ground where you can maneuver freely will be disastrous on hemmed-in ground where you're trapped. He even says, starkly, on desperate ground, fight.
Desperate ground, fight.
Yeah. It's profound. Sometimes the only option left is direct, courageous, all-out engagement. But that's only after you've rigorously assessed that it truly is desperate ground and not a situation where, deception or avoidance or a different tactic would be better. It's all about tailoring your strategy precisely to the circumstances you face.
And he really holds the general responsible, doesn't he? He talks about calamities like flight, insubordination, collapse, ruin, and blames them squarely on the general's own faults.
Absolutely. The buck stops there. But importantly, he also emphasizes the human element within your own forces. He stresses treating soldiers with humanity, with care.
Yeah.
But crucially, enforcing that iron discipline needed for victory. It's a very delicate balance.
Care and firmness.
Exactly. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it all comes down to deep observation and understanding human nature, both within your own team and when looking at your opponents or competitors. Sun Tzu gives these incredibly subtle signs to watch for in Chapter 9. Things like dust clouds telling you about troop movements, birds gathering over an enemy camp suggesting they might have left.
Little details.
Tiny details. Soldiers leaning on their spears indicating they're weary. Whispering in groups suggesting potential disunity or low morale. It's a powerful reminder that knowing your opponent isn't just about counting their numbers or assessing their resources. It's about understanding their psychological state, reading their subtle tells, figuring out their deeper motivations.
That applies everywhere, doesn't it? Competitive intelligence in business, reading the room in a tense meeting.
Everywhere. It's about paying attention.
Okay, Let's wrap up our dive into Sun Tzu by talking about what he considers the ultimate advantage. And that's foreknowledge, especially gained through spies. In the final chapter, chapter 13, he's incredibly clear about this. He says crucial foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, nor can it be obtained inductively from experience. You can't guess it or just figure it out from the past. So where does it come from?
He says it can only be obtained from other men, from human intelligence.
Spies.
He breaks down the whole art of espionage into 5 distinct classes, each with a specific job. You've got local spies, people who live in the district you're interested in. Inward spies, who are actually officials on the enemy's side. Doomed spies, who you deliberately give false information to, hoping they get captured and mislead the enemy.
Okay, those make sense.
But then there are the 2 really key ones, especially converted spies. These are the enemy's own spies that you manage to turn to bring over to your side. Sun Tzu calls these the most important type.
Why the most important?
Because they already understand the enemy's inner workings. They have access, they have context, they can deliver intelligence with unparalleled accuracy. And then, finally, you have surviving spies, the ones who go out and actually come back with authentic news.
It sounds like a really sophisticated intelligence network he's describing. He stresses extreme secrecy, being very generous with rewards, and needing real intuitive sagacity, sharp judgment to manage these agents effectively. He says no one in the army should be closer to the general or rewarded more highly than spies. So for you listening, where do you get your most critical, unvarnished information? It's a really interesting question.
It absolutely is. And Sun Tzu concludes this whole section by saying that the enlightened ruler and the wise general use the highest intelligence of the army for purposes of spying, and thereby they achieve great results. It's about valuing intelligence at the absolute highest level, recognizing it as the foundation of any effective strategy, and investing properly in those channels, those people, those methods that give you true, unfiltered insight into your landscape and your competitors. It's about knowing what's really going on beneath the surface.
So if we try to synthesize some of the really key overarching themes from The Art of War for you listening, there's this constant emphasis on the heavy cost of prolonged conflict, whether that's an actual war or a drawn-out legal battle, or even just a pointless, draining argument. Avoid it if you can.
Definitely. Cost is huge.
There's a massive push for strategic caution over just reacting emotionally. Remember that quote. Move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained. Fight not unless the position is critical. Be deliberate.
Think before you act. Always.
And always, the leader's ultimate role isn't just to win battles, but to protect their people, their country, their organization, and ultimately maintain peace and stability.
And underpinning absolutely all of this is that core idea of constant adaptation. Being like water, as he says in chapter 6, shaping its course according to the ground it flows over, never rigidly sticking to a plan just because it's the plan, especially when circumstances have clearly changed. The enduring wisdom of the art of war, I think, isn't just in the ancient tactics. It's in its universal application to strategic thinking. It's relevant whether you're on a historical battlefield or navigating a modern boardroom negotiation. It's about how to be effective, how to be resourceful, and ultimately, how to be victorious, often by working smarter, not just harder.
So, what does all this mean for you today? We've talked about grand strategy, the surprising power of deception, maybe better thought of as perception management, the vital need to understand your terrain, whatever that looks like for you, and the absolute importance of good intelligence, of knowing yourself and knowing your situation. We've seen that victory often comes from cleverly avoiding the fight, knowing yourself inside and out, maybe knowing your opponent or challenge even better. So I really encourage you to consider how these principles, awareness, preparation, strategic deception, or perception management, adaptability, how they might apply to your own challenges right now. Whether you're navigating a career change, dealing with a complex relationship, or simply striving for personal growth. And that brings us to our final thought for you to mull over. If mastering yourself and truly understanding your terrain are the ultimate keys to victory in any endeavor, where do you begin your next strategic deep dive? Thanks for listening to the Book Review Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment. See you next time.